A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming down today for our self-harm prevention month talks. Today is our first day and of our talks, followed by on the 28th of March, we will also have our second day of our talks. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Melvin Yong, PAP Mental Health Group, Member of Parliament, Radin Mas, SMC, to give his opening address today.
Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you, and my sincere thanks to Caring for Life for organizing this important conversation. Mental health affects every one of us, whether as youths navigating growing pressures or working adults juggling a myriad of responsibilities. Yet, despite how common these experiences are, it is still not always easy to talk about them openly. In Singapore, we are generally comfortable discussing performance, productivity, and progress. But when the conversation turns to how we are coping emotionally, the room can become noticeably quieter. That is why today's conversation matters. Non-suicidal self-injury, or NSSI, remains a significant mental health concern in Singapore. The National Youth Mental Health Study, which surveyed 2,600 youths aged 15 to 35, found that 1 in 4 youths, that's 25% of the respondents, had engaged in NSSI at least once in their lifetime, with nearly 7% reporting doing so in the past year. The median age of onset was just 14 years old. 14, a reminder that struggles can begin much earlier than many of us expect. The study also found higher rates among those experiencing severe depression or anxiety, and among youths who relied on avoidant coping strategies. Conversely, youths with stronger resilience and healthier coping skills were less likely to engage in NSSI. The message is therefore clear. Early identification matters. Resilience can be nurtured, and coping skills can be strengthened. Timely, compassionate support can change lives. At the People's Action Party, we believe that a strong and resilient society is one where individuals feel safe to seek help without fear of stigma. Mental health has therefore become an increasing national priority, with continued efforts to strengthen services, expand community support networks, and improve mental health literacy. Beyond policy, the PAP Mental Health Group works closely with community stakeholders to raise awareness and promote timely support within the community. Mental health must be supported not only in hospitals and clinics, but also in schools, workplaces, and the neighborhoods, wherever people live, learn, and work. Often, the first line of support is not a professional, but a friend, a colleague, a teacher, or a family member who notices and cares. We have seen this through collaborations such as the IMH Wellness Fiesta, which highlighted how everyday activities can contribute meaningfully to well-being, and through initiatives like the Makan Buddies, which foster peer support within the F&B sector. These efforts may look different on the surface, but they share a common purpose: to build environments where people feel safe to speak up and confident to seek support. Ultimately, advancing mental health well-being is a whole of nation effort. Let us continue building a culture where asking for help is seen as courage, not weakness, where checking in on someone is a habit, not an exception, and where no one feels they must suffer in silence. If each of us leaves today's gathering committed to one small action, one conversation, one act of support, one moment of listening, we will move closer to a society where mental health is openly supported and conversations happen without fear or judgment. Thank you for being part of this important journey, and I wish all of you a meaningful discussion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yong. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite Alex, Executive Director CFL, to give his sharings. Alex, please.
Thank you. So first of all, a very good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alex, the Executive Director of Caring for Life. And I just want to say that if you are behind your device right now, I want to encourage all of you to on your camera, right? I think this is one of those things, right, that is quite different if you're doing this in a physical venue versus an online venue. So if you are there right now, right, I want to encourage you to on your video, right, to stay engaged with us. And later on from our speaker, Dr. Kelvin, he also will be asking some questions and for interaction as well. So I understand that today is a very important topic, but I also want to encourage all of us here to just have a very open, honest conversation, but also with care as well, right? And at Caring for Life, we believe that suicide prevention cannot be left only to professionals or to moments of crisis. It has to be community effort. In fact, prevention starts much earlier in the everyday spaces of life, in our families, school, workplace, friendship, and communities. So this is why we believe that help seeking and help giving must go together. And it is important to encourage people to reach out for help, but we also need to ask whether the people around them know how to respond, right? Are we equipping friends, colleagues, leaders, parents, and community, not just to say, please get help, but to also listen, respond safely, and help someone move towards support. And when that becomes more normal, this is how we can begin to build a culture of care, a culture where people notice, check in, make space for honest conversation, and help one another earlier. This work also has to be collaborative, right? At Caring for Life, we see ourselves working alongside everyone who has a role to play: the government, corporates, community groups, education institutions, professionals, caregivers, people with lived experience, and members of public. Each of us reaches people in different spaces, and all of us have a part to play in building a stronger safety net. Now, before I close, I want to thank a few stakeholders and partners who make today possible, because I think this really reflects the kind of collaborative relationship we want to keep building through Caring for Life. So a big thanks to PAP Mental Health Group, Shine, our two speakers from IMH and Shine as well, Deeds and OpenJo, and also many of you here who have actively promoted, shared, and encouraged others to join this event. If this is your first time hearing these two platforms, Deeds and OpenJo, I want to encourage you to connect with the founders. They are doing really awesome job in their different areas, and they also have that compassion and caring heart, right, to want to collaborate with Caring for Life in this very, very important work. Now, I'm going to share some screen here. So just be aware that today's session is recorded and it will be uploaded on YouTube as well. So if you think that today's content is very helpful for yours, not only for yourself, but for those people or your friends who are not here today with us, please do not hesitate, right, to share that YouTube video to everyone. You can scan the QR code to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you have access to all recorded videos, including this one. We'll try to upload within the next few days and be notified of any new videos that will be released. At the same time, we actually have this, every month we have this community mental health webinar series. It is a free of charge event online, normally every first Saturday of the month, unless there's a public holiday. For this particular one, it is on 11 April, 2 to 3:30 p.m. It is on parenting across developmental stages by someone from Focus on the Family Singapore. In fact, April, May, and June is going to be parenting series. So we're going to cover a lot of very important topics around this, right? And continue to keep ourselves equipped and improve on our literacy on different needs, so that when we come across people of this kind, we will know what to do as well. Yeah. So you can scan the QR code, register them. They're all free of charge event. We also have one that's very, very interesting in my opinion, and that is an AI and songwriting workshop on 1st April, Wednesday, 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. at Cane Hill Community Club. Again, this is a free of charge event as well. So it's really about learning how do we use AI to write songs. But it's not just the AI platform itself, but to us, we believe that it is very important to recognize, to learn how to recognize and express how we feel. And this is one of those examples where we can use AI to enable that part of it. And we also have other components, which includes understanding, for example, song themes and structure, right? Some basic editing skills. And we hope that you can walk away from this workshop with a song that speaks of your story, your emotion, and some of the things that you want others to know about you as well. This was based on a experience that we had last year, where we had songs based on caregivers of people with mental health issues, and it spoke to many people out there. So if this is something that speaks to you, I want to encourage you to scan this QR code to join us in this first April 2026, Wednesday, 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. at KMUCC. It's free of charge event for all of us. One last thing, right? So if I mentioned earlier about how suicide prevention is everyone's business, we have one free of charge suicide prevention workshop coming up on the 18th April, 2 to 6 p.m. It's a Saturday on Zoom, right? If this is something that speaks to you, you can scan the top QR code to register. In this workshop, you will learn how to recognize early sign of suicide ideation. And how do you then have that safe conversation and bring this person to safety? Right. So once again, this is something that speaks to you. You can scan the top QR code to register. If you can't make it, you can scan the second QR code to check out all the other already released dates. Or subscribe and follow us. And from time to time, when we release new dates, you'll be notified immediately as well. All our live training, which is this suicide prevention workshop, is free of charge at the end of this year because it's been supported by our donors to recognize the importance of this work. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the time back to Dean, right? But I want to encourage all of you today, right? As you engage with our speaker, please do not hesitate to ask any questions that you have as well. This is a very unique opportunity, right, for you to ask questions regarding self-harm. And do know that this is only part one. The second part is on 28 March, same timing, 2 to 4 p.m., right, on a Saturday as well. So back to you, Dean. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Without further ado, I'd like to invite our speaker, Mr. Kelvin Ng, to give his sharing for today on understanding self-harm in children and teenagers. Alex will be the moderator during the segments of the talk as well as the Q&A. Dr. Kelvin Ng, please.
Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
And can you all see my slides? Are you able to see my slides?
Not yet.
Not yet, no? Okay, I need to share my screen. All right. Are you able to see my slides now?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Once again, thank you very much, Alex and Dean and the people for Caring for Life for inviting me to give this sharing on understanding self-harm in children and teenagers as part of your Self-Harm Prevention Month. I'm very glad to be able to give this talk because as you all have heard our guest of honor's opening speech, the recent National Youth Mental Health Survey did tell us some disturbing statistics, and we do feel that this is a very important topic which we would like to just gain more understanding for everyone who is attending this talk. So before I proceed, just like to have a little bit of interaction with the audience, if you all don't mind. I have a little survey here. I'd like to know just who I'm talking to. If this was a live event, it would be a whole lot easier. But currently, because of the Zoom session, I'd like to know who you are. If you all don't mind, you just enter the answers into the chat. I thank Alex for helping to moderate the chat. And I would address there's a reason why I am doing this little survey, because I like to address some myths and misconceptions. I like to get a baseline understanding of the audience today. How much do you all know about self-harm. So I see the chat that there are many answers coming in. Thank you. I'm just taking a look. Just on first glance, it looks like there are more females who in the audience today, and many of us are between 30 to 60 years old, a few who are more than 60 years old. Yeah. Thank you so much for your part for this. So far, I have not seen any youths, anyone who is less than 30 years, that many youths. Okay. Thank you so much. Next question. That's one who is less than 18, DK. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, thank you. Next question. I have experienced or interacted with persons who have self-harm before. A little bit of a personal question, but I guess many of us who are joining this talk may have had friends, relatives, or even, in our line of work, interacted with young persons who have self-harmed. Simple yes or no answer if you all don't mind. And for those who have interacted or experienced, person who have self-harm, in what capacity? Was it a family member? Was it a friend? Or was it in a professional capacity that you had this experience with person with self-harm? So friend, therapist, family member, friend, person at work, and all three even, friend, family, and professional. Okay, so I guess many of us in the audience, I guess many of us in the audience do have, some experience with persons who have self-harm before. Again, thank you so much for your sharing with us, and it warms my heart to know that even though you've had experience with persons with self-harm, you have come forward to attend today's talk as well. Uh, some people in my line of work, I'm not sure, but I am a psychiatrist. I work in the Institute of Mental Health, IMH, and I work in the emergency room or emergency services. And in my line of work, persons who self-harm come through my emergency room daily. And many experienced professionals do find it difficult and challenging to work with persons who self-harm. It goes against our nature as a doctor, of a helping or caring professional, to see why would a person who is young, vibrant, full of life would try and hurt themselves. As doctors in other fields of medicine, where they're trying to save lives, stop cancer, stop diabetes, mend broken bones, take out inflamed appendices and all that. In psychiatry, we deal with persons who are healthy, who have a bright future, and they're trying to hurt themselves. It is difficult for us, even as professionals, to try and understand why persons would do this. Now, the next question are some statements. There are some statements which I would like to again poll the audience to get an understanding of the audience. So for the first one, if you all don't mind, only female self-harm, true or false? If you don't mind, just give some feedback on the chat. Okay. A lot of people are saying that it's false. Yes. Number two, self-harm is a suicide or failed suicide attempt. Is this true or false? Again, lots of false. Self-harm, not suicide, but may lead to one. Okay, that is somehow true. So many false, one or two, one that says it's somehow true. Okay, very interesting. Anyone who self-harms is crazy and should be locked up. Okay. Self-harm is just attention seeking. Many of you are saying false. False, but if need to hospitalize is good, then should. Depends. Very good. Another one who says depends. Self-harm is just attention seeking. How about that? People self-harm because they are attention seekers. Sometimes could be a call for help. It's not attention, but want to seek help. Okay, possible. Self-harm is untreatable. How about that? False, false, false. Many false. Need attention. Okay, next a couple more. People who self-harm are manipulative. Depends again on an individual. False, 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 false. Not always, sometimes, depends. Yes, yes. People who self-harm are part of the gothic or emo subgroup. It is part of popular culture. Many youngsters are doing it. And there are people who self-harm because of that. That is popular, false. In a way to get attention, depends. Don't think so. Okay. Somehow, depends. False, but there are true cases. Possibly it's influence and depends. Due to copying behavior, yes. All right. Depends on how broadly we define self-harm. Non-suicidal self-injury as what our MP was defining. Possible due to peer influence. All right. People who self-harm enjoy the pain or they don't feel pain or can't feel it, so that's why they cut themselves. Gothic culture seems to glorify self-harm. Possible. Can't feel it means they can't feel the pain. False, as it takes away the emotional pain for them. Depends on definition of enjoy. Some enjoy it as it is a relief from their emotional pain. Substitutes the pain. Can feel pain, but better than heart pain. And someone even agreed to that. Too overwhelmed by their mix of emotions. Self-harm is a way of self-soothing and managing stress. Very good, very good. Sometimes masochistic. Possible. Someone who self-harms can stop if they really want to. It's just in their mind. They can stop anytime they want. False, maybe. Some say true, some say false, some say yes, some say no. Some say depends. No can be addictive. Yes, we support and help, depends. Addictive. Depends on the individual. Okay, true. But with therapy, a lot of encouragement. Don't think they know how to manage, especially if they are younger, depends. So this particular statement seems to ring with the audience, because it's most of the other statements is a flat out false. Sometimes depends, but sometimes this has this particular statement has more depends, has more queries, I believe. Okay, all right. And the last statement is someone who self-harms is a danger to others. True or false? False. Possible? Someone said possible. All right. Sometimes there can be a danger to others. Feels like none are absolute. True. False but possible. Okay. I think people self-harm by cutting, banging their head, hitting other parts of their body, burning themselves, overdosing on medicines, strangulating or suffocation, taking drugs or alcohol, unprotected sexual intercourse. What in your opinion is classified as self-harm? All. Two people say all. Three people say all. Yeah, all. All right. In increasing degree of intensity. Okay. Cutting, banging head, burning themselves, overdosing. Other reckless behavior like wanting to be hit by a speeding vehicle. All right. Okay. Oops, sorry. And I think people self-harm to get attention, follow friends. It's a cry for help, cope with difficult emotions. It is an attempt to communicate distress. It's an attempt to punish themselves, or it's an attempt to kill themselves. All possible. Genuine cry for help. Mixed answers. All possible. All of the above. All. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for cope, attempt, punish. All right. All but less of kill themselves. Okay. All right. So thank you so much for your participation. This gives me an idea of the so-called the audience, what is your perceptions and understanding of self-harm? I do see some people have some ideas, and it is very interesting. Those few questions, the true false statements, are actually the top 10 so-called myths and misconceptions about self-harm. And it's really heartening to from your answers. It's really heartening to see that many of you all say that it is false. Because in some places, up to 70%, 80% of the so-called polled audience would list those statements as true. As true. And over here, from just a brief look at the answers that have come through, sounds like 90% of you all know that it is false. So just a little bit of the scope of my talk today. I'm going to talk to us a little bit of what is self-harm versus suicide, what's the relationship between self-harm and suicide, who are the persons who self-harm, what are some of the risk factors and associations that we know that for persons who self-harm, why do they self-harm, and do persons who self-harm, do they have a mental illness? Is self-harming a mental illness? It's a mental illnesses which make people self-harm, and a little bit on a management of self-harm, because I understand on the 28th, someone else will talk to you about so-called first aid and how to manage persons who self-harm. So I will just cover that very, very briefly. So self-harm, there are many different definitions. As one of the participants in the chat group says, that depends on what you define or how you define self-harm. So self-harm is defined by NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, which is the equivalent of the MOH of in the UK. It is the intentional act of self-poisoning or self-injury, irrespective of the motivation or apparent purpose of the act and its expression of emotional distress. So when a person in this day and age, as far back as 2023, when a person presents to a healthcare professional with self-harm, we look at it as something that is important, and it is irrespective of the motivation or the apparent purpose of the act. And so it spans behaviors from what we call NSSI, as what our MP guest of honor said, Mr. Melvin said to us, is non-suicidal self-injurious behavior. Means that they are hurting themselves, but the motivation behind it is not to die and not to commit suicide. And it can even include serious attempts to die by suicide. So NICE, which is the UK, this is how they have defined self-harm. But today we are going to focus more on this NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury, or in the older literature, if for those professionals out there, they call it deliberate self-harm, or DSH. So self-harm versus suicide. What is the definition of suicide? Suicide is the act of intentionally causing their own death. And the persons who try to attempt suicide or who are suicidal, they actually have this decathesis, or what we call a withdrawal of energy from attachment relationships, meaning that they turn away, they become socially isolated, they say goodbye because they know that it's the end. So they actually end whatever things that tie them in that sense to life in that sense. Also, they leave their attachments or whatever that holds them to life or to the earth. And thus, they often leave those who are bereaved or those who are left behind unaware of the extent of the suicidality until after the death occurs. So suicide is almost always unexpected. Suicide is almost always so-called regretful. And we almost always will ask ourselves, why didn't I see that coming? How could this have happened? And was there anything I could have done to stop it? And most persons, or what we call suicide survivors, are often left puzzled because, hey, this person seemingly quite normal, but when they look back, they realize that, hey, he was at or she was actually cutting off bit by bit their attachments. They may have given away their belongings. They may have put on written a will. They may have said goodbye. They might have said sorry. So it's that's what suicide is. It's a detachment from your attachments in that sense. Versus the so-called NSSI or non-suicidal self-injury. This is they have intentional, they do it on purpose, direct injuring of body tissue, but it is done without suicidal intentions, meaning they will hurt oneself, but they're not trying to kill or not to end one's own life. Their aim is not to extinguish life, and their relationships or their attachments to their loved ones, to their friends, to the world in general, generally remains intact. So there's a difference between suicide versus non-suicidal self-injury. And so suicide often considered a tragedy. Those who are suicidal or what we call self-harming, again, I don't think this is representative of today's audience because many people consider them to be attention-seeking. Once a suicide occurs, everyone is present. Everyone comes together because, hey, there's this loss of this attachment and it's a permanent loss. And people say, hey, why didn't I see this coming? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? But for those who are self-harming, generally people try to avoid them or think that they are manipulative, they're trying to control other people with their behaviors. Everyone feels bad when the person commits suicide because there's this big, huge question mark of, could I have done more? Did I cause this? Is this my fault? But when a person self-harms, then people will say, yeah, again, then I have to go and in trouble again, emotionally distressed again. How often are you going to do this? People get irritated. In suicide, everyone wishes they saw the signs or should have seen it coming. But for those who are self-harming, everyone pretends the problem isn't there and tries to dismiss them. I just get better lah. Don't think so much lah. This is again what generally people would think. For those who are suicide, everyone wishes that they hadn't done it. It says that they should gone too early, gone too fast. I'm sure that something could have been done to change that situation. Versus those who are non-suicidal, self-injurious type. No one believes that I will do. Yeah, never mind lah. He always does the same thing anyway. They're not serious. They won't go and kill themselves. But so these are some myths. These are some misconceptions about self-harm. So please, if someone tells you they're suicidal, please take them seriously. Don't be the one who pushes them away. Be the one who tries to keep them here because it could save their life. So what is the relationship between self-harm and suicide? So this is not a difference between self-harm and suicide anymore, but there is a relationship. Risk of suicide within 12 months after a presentation to services with self-harm is about 30 times higher than in the general population. A person who uses self-harm as a way to, as what someone mentioned in the chat, self-soothing, managing their emotional state. I don't believe that that is the only way that they use to manage their emotions or to soothe themselves. But when it comes to a point when their emotional distress is so bad that only self-harm works, they're probably 1 or 2 steps away from just ending it all. That is what we need to understand. Because what we have seen, anyone who presents to services like the A&E, for example, for self-harm within the next 1 year, the chances that they will attempt suicide is 30 times higher than the other person who has not self-harmed. Well, this was findings by Kapoor in 2013. Number two, nearly half of those who died by suicide have previously self-harmed. Again, same study by Kapoor in 2013. And Beckman, we see that more violent methods of self-harm increases the likelihood of a fatal attempt. So yeah, someone did mention, is it increasing intensity or is it different methods or multiple methods of self-harm that they so-called indulge in? But what we do see is that the more violent or the more lethal that persons use to self-harm themselves increases the likelihood that they will commit suicide later on, especially if one sees an increasing severity. If last time you used to cut superficially, cut to see blood, cut deeper, cut until the structures underneath the skin that are more vital in that sense. We do, if there's what we call an escalation or an increasing severity of the methods, it sometimes shows an escalation of the pain that they are feeling. And nobody can keep on tolerating more and more pain. And they require more physical pain to deal with their increased emotional pain, then there's a day when they will just say, I can't take it anymore. So it is important to understand self-harm and suicide are related. So who self-harms? The big scary thing is majority of self-harming behaviors do not reach professional attention. So there are many people out there in the community, in our population, who are in so much emotional distress that they can only cope by self-harming. And they do not present to services, healthcare services, mental health care services. As what our guest of honor, Mr. Melvin said, they are out there where you live, where you work, and they don't go out and look for help. What we do see is that 70% of young people admitted to hospital following episodes of self-harm described that they had previous acts of self-harm which had not been reported before. So they would have self-harm at least once, if not more, before it becomes serious enough for them to need to seek medical help. It is often rare for the first time that a person self-harms, that person will go and seek for medical help. So up to 70% have had previous self-harm attempt even. This is a UK study called By Their Own Young Hand, done by Horton and Rodan in 2006. They interviewed 6,000 year 11 pupils. So I think that would be 14, 15 years old in Oxford. So it's a huge study. Our own National Youth Mental Health Survey was only 2,600. So in Oxford, way back in 2006, they interviewed 6,000 pupils. So these are not persons who had presented to a hospital or to mental health services. This is just like a school survey, very similar to our National Mental Youth Study. 13% had tried to self-harm at some point in their lives. 7% self-harm in the 1 year leading up to that study. Out of them, 15% reported thoughts of suicide. And understand this. So this is way back in 2006, before we had too much internet, before we had COVID, before we had all of these wars in the Middle East and all. These were better time than what we are in now. And young persons in the UK, 14, 15 years old, 15% of them were already thinking of suicide. 54% of those reporting self-harm describe more than one episode. Again, what we have learned, self-harmers do self-harm more than once. And the largest proportion of acts of self-harm, possibly amounting to 80 to 90% of persons who self-harm, is invisible to the professionals. That's what this study by Hawthorne and Rodan in 2006 showed us. I have to talk about the National Youth Mental Health Study, even though our guest of honor mentioned briefly about it. This from the National Youth Mental Health Study, they publish many papers, but I'm just talking about one particular paper, which is the prevalence and correlates of non-suicidal self-injury among youths in Singapore. Adapted findings from the National Youth Mental Health Study was published in 2025. So this is the latest data that Singapore has. This was a nationwide survey of 2,600 youths aged between 15 to 35 years old residing in Singapore during a 10-month period of October 2022 to June 2023. After they surveyed all these youths, they took about 1 or 2 years to tabulate the results, do the research statistics, and this is what we found. As what Mr. Melvin said, 1/4, 25% of youths in Singapore, so 1 in 4, in their entire lifetime, would have self-harmed themselves at least once. And in the last 1 year, 7% of them, as soon as 1 year, 7% of them had self-harmed. And more worryingly, repetitive non-suicidal self-injury, NSSI, I mean, more than or equals to 5 times, meaning they had hurt themselves 5 times or more, 11.6%. So if it's 25% who have hurt themselves once, half of them hurt themselves more than 5 times. And 7% of them did it just within the last 1 year. Median age means it's the highest repeating number. So most of them, when did they first start? 14 years old. Both male and females do self-harm, and both male and females do cut themselves at 14 years old. So they actually do start out young. There is another study which I did not include, but these were studies of persons who self-harm and presented to mental health services. That median age of persons who present with self-harm to mental health services was 17 years old. So what we do is they start at 14, they self-harm repetitively, and maybe only after 2 to 3 years, then do they present to health services. So these are the numbers that we see here in Singapore. Significantly more females than males engaged in NSSI during their lifetime, 30% versus 18%, so almost 2 to 1. Almost 2 to 1 females. Significantly more females than males engaged in repetitive self-harm, 8.6% females, 5% males. Lower educational attainment, so less than university, was associated with higher odds of lifetime NSSI. However, the authors of this paper said that the low educational attainment is often associated with disadvantaged social and environmental situations. It may not mean that they have a lower IQ. It just means that perhaps due to their social situation, due to the environment that they were in, they did not have a chance to get higher education. Maybe not enough money. Maybe had to go out early to work. And what we do then see is that there is also a relationship between disadvantaged social setup and bad environments with self-harm, what we call ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Or if you have a poor social situation, poor family setup, environment is not safe as a child, where they have suffered abuse, ACEs, adverse childhood events. These have also been, there is a relationship with persons who self-harm as well. So it may not just be low education, but it could be a mixture of these things. Our guest of honor also mentioned this, persons who had depression and anxiety, severe and extremely severe depressive and anxiety symptoms were associated with higher odds of engaging in non-suicidal self-injury. OR stands for odds, 1.464, so almost 1.5 times more likely to engage in self-harm if they had depression or anxiety. Greater use of avoidance coping was also associated with higher odds of lifetime self-harm, odds of 1.049, or one time more often. So what does avoidance coping mean? They don't face the issues, they just run away, they avoid. And when we all know that if you avoid a problem, it's going to come back bigger and more difficult to solve further down the road. Youths with body shape dissatisfaction, twice as likely, the odds were 1.969 times, to ever engage in self-harm compared to youths without body shape dissatisfaction. So this is quite important finding as well. Hazardous use of alcohol, so odds are 1.769, are also associated with high odds of lifetime self-injury. Daily smoking also associated with higher odds. And as what our guest of honor, Mr. Melvin, told us, higher resilience was associated with lower odds of ever engaging in self-harm. So this is noted to be a protective factor. And we do find that if they're going to start young at 14 years old, that is a time when we can do some intervention, as what Mr. Melvin told us. Teach them how to cope with problems in a more healthy way. Increase their resilience. Tell them to not use avoidance. No, but this takes more time. This takes more effort. It's always faster to just run away, or than to train someone up to face their fears, stand up to the bully, to ignore the hate comments on their face. No, they don't use Facebook anymore. On their Insta, not to hide away in the internet, but to go out and face life, make real friends rather than virtual friends. All of this increases their resilience. Go through one bad patch, they are strong enough to go through a similar patch the next time. Go through many bad patches, they become stronger. But if all you do, oh, just never mind, turn on the TV, turn on the internet, swipe your TikTok, and just ignore, that leads you nowhere because you're just right back where you started. Methods: cutting, burning, carving words into their skin, carving pictures or marks into their skin, severe scratching, biting, dripping acid, sticking sharp objects into the skin, rubbing glass, breaking bones, banging head, punching oneself, opening up wounds to prevent them from healings, and other forms. And we do see that these things called less than 0.001. So these are the ones that are more common: cutting, scratching, preventing wounds from healing, and other forms. But all of these have been reported, some more often than others. So, why does a person self-harm? Well, for a multitude of reasons. These are quotes from a book called A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. He soon grew to appreciate the secrecy, the control of the cuts. And when he did it, it was as if he was draining away the poison, the filth, the rage inside him. I feel that this Yanagihara, this author who wrote this book, has either may have engaged in self-harm or has a very good understanding of why people self-harm. There's this secrecy, there's this almost shameful aspect of it. There's this need for control, and there's this inner pain, inner distress, which when you cut or when he cut was draining away the poison, the filth, and the rage. Many of the persons who self-harm that I have come into contact with in the course of my work have told me about all of these things as well. Another study, these are in the Singapore Emergency Department. So this is not the IMH Emergency Department where I work in, but in, let's say, SGH or NUH, those kind of emergency departments. This is a paper that was published again in 2025. Adolescent self-harm and suicide attempts and analysis of emergency department presentations in Singapore. So they ran to review 221 patient records who visited KKH ED for suicidal and self-harm attempts aged 10 to 19 years old. Again, we see the mean age is around 14 years old. Again, we do see that females are a majority. But what we do see, hey, they in Singapore here, they tend to have drug overdose. 70% of them came in were drug overdose. Majority, more than half of them was using overdose on paracetamol or Panadol. More females, twice the number of females versus males. But they also had more severe methods like jumping from height, of which males were the ones, and they outnumbered the females 3 times. Males would jump from height, and of course, self-cuts or self-lacerations was also a method that they used. So all of them came in for self-harm, whether cutting or overdosing or even jumping from height, banging their heads and all that. 35% of them actually had suicidal intent. 35% is very, very high. 52% was ambivalent, meaning, yeah, maybe, maybe not. 41%, almost half of them had a previous suicide attempt. And 75% or 74.2, 75% had a previous self-harm incident. And these numbers were just in 2025. So from 2022, 2023, but again, it takes them about 1.5 years to 2 years before it gets published. But these are our most recent numbers. And it is disturbing because 35% had suicidal intent. So if you all could remember in the chat when I asked, self-harm is just a failed or suicide attempt, many of you have said no. But that's not true. One third is suicidal or was suicidal. Half could be suicidal. 40% had a previous suicide attempt and 75% had previous self-harm before. So we do see that, yes, they are repetitive. What were these presentations or these self-harm attempts associated with? Stress. Half of them had stress. They couldn't cope with their emotions, or 50.7% of them. 53.4%, more than half, had mood and anxiety conditions. And we already saw that in the National Youth Mental Health Survey as well. Depression and anxiety is related to self-harm. Neurodevelopmental and conduct disorders, ADHD, ASD, ODD, these attention deficit hyperactive disorder, autism, oppositional disorders, more common in males, eating disorders. These are the ones who have the body image issues that was also noted in our National Youth Mental Health Study. It's more common in females. An older study. Now this talking about deliberate self-harm, or that this is the old name for NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury. This was a paper in 2018, but these are a study of patients who had come for help already. So this is not the 74, 75% or 80, 90% who had not come forward to seek help. These are the 20, 30% that have come forward to seek help. Where did we get the numbers from? 400 patients recruited from child and adult outpatient clinics from the IMH way back in 2015. What we saw was that 58.8% of them had this deliberate self-harm and 32% of them had ever attempted suicide. So we do know that persons with mental illness are at a higher risk for self-harm and suicide. Why did they do it? So these are from the patients to stop bad feelings. Many in the chat group says that they feel numb or empty, and yes, it is to relieve these feelings of numbness and emptiness, to punish themselves, to feel something even if it was pain. So yes, they don't hurt themselves because they can't feel it, or they do feel the pain. Oh, and then there's this one to say is to feel relaxed. So these were the 5 most highly endorsed motivations of why they had self-harm. Grandfather or father of modern psychiatry, Sigmund Freud. Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. So the avoidance coping mechanisms that the youth are nowadays using or doing, they swallow all their feelings, they hide, they don't express these emotions. Happy, you can tell. If they're sad, if they're angry, everything is, they just come back home, go into their room, start scrolling on their handphones. You don't know whether they've had a good day, you don't know whether they've had a bad day, you don't know whether they're being bullied online. They don't express emotions. They're just they're just stuck to their screens all day. They don't go out with friends. As adults, we sometimes, okay, Friday night comes along, we go out for drinks, we bitch about work and we express our emotions. But unexpressed emotions, especially the negative emotions, according to Freud, will never die. They're only buried, but they're still alive. And they'll come forth later in uglier ways. Okay. Containing pain and communication. This is one of the most common reasons of why people will self-harm. So the ability to articulate your feelings into words, what we call mentalizing, is complex and difficult. Kids can't, and maybe the elderly folk who don't speak English, for example, they can't tell you that I'm feeling anxious. They can't say that I'm having a panic attack. They can't say that I'm feeling sad, down, depressed, fearful. They can't say that I'm paranoid or overly suspicious. These are feelings. These are bodily bodily experiences. If I'm feeling scared, if I'm feeling worried, it often starts off, oh wow, heart is pounding. We use terms like that to describe it. Oh, my heart is pounding and I can't seem to catch my breath. Ah, neck feels very stiff, shoulders are a bit tight. Tummy is we use this term called butterflies in my stomach. And then we find that I need to rush to the toilet, want to pee, but nothing comes up, but I feel this urgency. So emotions, especially all these scary ones, like anxiety or panic or fear, they often begin as these bodily responses to these events, which can be either painful or frightening. End of the day, if my heart is racing, I'm sweating like mad when it's not hot. I don't feel hot, what we call cold sweats. My hands start to tremble. I can't seem to catch my breath. These, we can feel this. And for those of us who have felt this kind of experiences, you can tell that, hey, this could be, stage fright. This could be anxiety. This could be a panic attack. But end of the day, what goes through the mind is that, shit, I'm going to die. Am I having a heart attack? Am I going to die? Because I've never felt like this before, and I don't understand what it is. It is painful, it is uncomfortable, it is distressing, and it is frightening. But if we can transform these experiences, or we can express them out into words, because we've been taught from young, what is the meaning? What does this thing, how is it represented? We give it a name. If I tell you, oh, this thing is very long, it's crescent shape, it is yellow, and when I peel off the outer layer, it is light yellow, and then I can eat it, and it's sometimes sweet, sometimes sour. Do you know what that is? That's a banana. I mean, my daughter is now 15 months old, and her favorite fruit is a banana. She can't really call Papa, can't really call Mama, but when she sees it, she will go Nana. No, so banana. She calls Nana. So giving a name to an object helps us to understand, rather than each time I have to say, oh, that yellow one that is bent in shape, where you have to peel off the skin and then so you can eat it. No, we call it banana. We know what it means. We know what it represents. It helps us to understand. It helps us to communicate. And if I were to say panic attack, I say anxiety, fear, it helps me to cognitively or in our minds understand it. And once we can transform these emotions or express these experiences into words, it makes that particular emotion familiar. I can understand it. It can then be stored and I can express it better. Persons who self-harm, unfortunately, they can be overwhelmed by these painful emotional states, and they may not understand or they're unable to express or understand these complex, painful, disturbing emotions or feelings. So what do? They self-harm. Self-harm then localizes the pain into a specific area. Like as mentioned in anxiety, oh, heart racing, cannot breathe, butterflies in the stomach, need to go and pee, having cold sweats, hand shaking. Wow, every part of the body is running wild. And mine is blank, or mine is racing with 101 thoughts, but the only thought that's running through my mind is, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. How scary is that? How difficult is that to cope with? Because everything in my body is going wrong. But if I cut myself, I feel this pain right here in my wrist, on my arm, on my thigh. I understand that pain because I'm in pain. I'm in emotional pain. But what is the word for emotional pain? There isn't a word for emotional pain. I'm just using all these descriptors or descriptions of what a person is feeling. But the person cannot understand because it is so painful. It is so distressing. And so I understand it or I express it in terms that I can understand. Ah, I cut myself, it is painful. And this pain equals to everything else that is breaking down. So it helps them regain control, helps them to recognize this pain, helps them to put a name or put a meaning to that pain. And thus, once I can find a meaning, once I can find a so-called word or an expression of that pain, I can communicate it to others. Recently, I had a paper cut on my finger. Wow, damn painful. Then I went to tell my wife, hey, I got paper cut. Then my wife, oh, poor thing, or put a handy plus over it. Oh. Then she soothes me. I have expressed my pain or paper cut. But a person who has emotional pain, emotional distress, you can't see it, right? You can't see it. There are no scars, no cuts that you can see. And then it says, I'm in pain. Oh, what's wrong? Headache, stomach ache, go toilet, take Panadol. No, I'm in pain. What kind of pain? I don't know. I'm just in pain. After a while, yeah, same thing lah. But no, pain is pain. And when they cut themselves, it helps them to control. It helps them to recognize, helps them to understand. And then after that, hey, I'm communicating my needs, my distress. So they have difficulty understanding this emotional pain, but they are able to understand physical pain. Some of the patients that I have seen tells me that they cut. Why cut so superficially? Very, very light cuts. They tell me that, oh, cut, I feel the pain. And then because it's a superficial thing, then the pain will go away. So when the physical pain fades away, my emotional pain, my inner pain fades along with it. It helps them as what have been mentioned, as self-soothing. And some cut, not just cut to feel the pain. Some of them need to cut to the point where blood comes out. Some need to cut to see blood. I have seen patients who come in and say that I cut, but the razor was too blunt, so couldn't draw any blood. Some cut because they feel that the blood is something internal, something inside. And so when they see blood, when it comes out, it's exiting out, and then my inner pain, my inner distress flows out together with it. These are some of the excuse me, things that some of my patients have actually shared with me about. It is a way of containing what we call traumatic memories. Some often occurs when individuals are overwhelmed by what we call unresolved traumatic childhood memories, or what I mentioned earlier on as ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. When we are young and we've undergone some trauma, some adverse event, because we are young, our ability to cope, our ability to understand is very, very limited. And if you're loved by mommy and daddy, that's good. If you're loved by mommy, that's good. If you're loved by daddy, that's good. Some people are not only not loved by mommy and daddy, but they are being hurt by mommy and daddy. The first relationship that you have in your life, which is supposed to be protective, nurturing, unconditional love, is adverse, how then are you able to trust anyone else if the first relationship that you ever had is screwed up? The way to recover from an ACE or adverse childhood event or traumatic childhood memory is very, very difficult. These are what we call the original pain, and they can be triggered by seemingly insignificant events. Just say something which reminds them of something else. Wow, then it can bring forth a very, very traumatic or disturbing reaction. So some people say, why are you overreacting? Something so small only wow. The world is ending, is it? Goodness. But that's because it has triggered the original pain, and they are responding not to you per se, but to the original pain that they experienced before. And self-harm helps to so-called ground the individual in the present. The pain brings them out of, back when I was helpless and hopeless, and I'm now back here in the present. And when they so-called dissociate, go back into the past in that sense, they have a lot of this numbness. So yes, some people say talks about the numbness that they feel. When these memories come back, how were they able to cope? They just ignore, become numb to it. And that numbness comes back. But pain brings them back to life. It alleviates the numbness and the dissociation that often accompany such memories. Van der Kolk in 2014 says it allows the individuals to reenact a past traumatic event where they were helpless with a sense of control in the present. So back then, they were helpless, they were young, they couldn't do anything to protect themselves, they could not stop this from happening to them. It was frightening, it was scary, but now I can do something, I can control myself. But the only way I have learned to control myself is that I go numb in the past to deal with this. But now I don't want to feel this numbness anymore. And what is my locus of control? I cut myself. So now I can control, but yes, I'm using not such a great method, but it helps me to contain my traumatic memories. Of course, eliciting care. Self-harm can be triggered by fears of abandonment or neglect in relationships. Self-harm can elicit care from others, albeit in a dysfunctional way. Unfortunately, when this dysfunctional method succeeds in getting attention, they can lead to damaging spirals, downward spirals, where the frequency and severity of self-harm increase. Yes, cut myself, oh, you poor thing. What happened to you? Hey, I got some care, I got some concern. The next few times I cut myself, why are you doing it again? Then what do? I escalate. I cut deeper. Oh my God, so deep, so much blood. Oh, send you to the hospital, stay with you by the hospital bedside. So that's what the person then learns. More severe, more care. And so yeah, it is, some people do that. And yes, addiction, as was mentioned in the chats as well. Repeated self-harm can be addictive. It shares features with addictions like substance misuse and gambling. So it's believed to release natural opioids. Opioids help to deal with pain. And so why when I cut is painful, my body will release all these natural opioids to stop the pain. But in so doing, it also stimulates the addiction pathway or the reward pathway in the brain. And then I crave to do it more. And then this becomes an entrenched method of communication or coping with pain, and then it can hinder the development of healthier communication methods. Protection of both self and others. Self-harm reduces the intensity of violence and suicidal impulses. This is the anger, the frustration, the pain that I have, which I have to turn it against myself. If I were to release all these years of pain and all that, the whole world will probably, go nuclear. So in order to prevent harm to others, in order to reduce the harm to self. If I don't release this pain, I will die. So how? I self-harm. So that I don't have so much hatred, so much anger to go and take revenge. I don't have so much pain and so much hatred, so much guilt about myself that I will go and commit suicide. So yes, they see it as the lesser of two evils. If I self-harm, I feel a bit better. I'm able to release some tension, and I don't go and hurt somebody, and I don't go and hurt myself. And now, self-harm and mental illness. This is yet another study, deliberate self-harm among adolescent psychiatric outpatients in Singapore, published in 2018. 398 outpatients seen at the CGH psych clinic were reviewed. 23% engaged in at least one type of deliberate self-harm. Among those who self-harmed, 12% had history of abuse, either physical or sexual. 41% had history either using currently or not, or past of alcohol. 33% had history of smoking. 32% had positive family history of psychiatric illnesses. And so here leads me to want to talk to you guys a little bit about mental illness, major depressive disorder, as we saw in the National Youth Mental Health Survey. People who are depressed and anxious had a higher association with non-suicidal self-injury. So we talk about depression, talk about sadness. Very depressed, very depressed. That's different from when the psychiatrist, says that you are depressed, because I'm talking about a major mental illness, a major depressive disorder, and it's akin to telling you that you've got cancer or you've got COVID or whatever else. It is an illness. It is not something that you can just wake up from or feel better from. Or it hijacks the brain. This disorder hijacks the brain, and it negatively affects how people think, how people act, and how people feel. And it is prolonged, more than 2 weeks of feelings of sadness and loss of interest. It affects ability to function. There are these symptoms where they feel sad, they have loss of interest, they have changes in the appetite, sleep gets affected, energy levels are low, they feel worthless, they feel guilty, they cannot focus, they cannot concentrate, and there are thoughts of death and suicide. Depression increases the risk. 15% of depressed patients commit suicide. 10 times as many will attempt suicide but not succeed. Or persons with depression also have increases of alcohol and drug abuse, which we saw in the study from Changi, that people who use drugs, people who smoke, people who drink alcohol also have a higher degree of self-harm. They can also develop panic disorders, intense anxiety. They're more prone to having a medical illness, more prone to have a positive family history, and they have poorer social supports, and they have more unemployment. So depression has all of these risks. Depression itself increases self-harm. All of these things can also increase your self-harm. So depression is a double whammy in that sense. Depression, guilt, and self-image. Some self-harm because they feel that they are bad, they are guilty, they're undeserving, they're useless, and so they need to be punished. And self-harming then is a way for them to punish themselves. Some feel ugly on the inside. So this is about the self-image. So we did see, right, persons, the youth with bodies, with their self-image issues or body shape dissatisfaction. We saw that was almost 2 times more likely to engage in self-harming, because they feel ugly on the inside. They're ugly, so they cut themselves. So that while the exterior or the external image reflects what they see or what they feel on their inside. So I've seen persons who are very, very pretty, very, 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 very beautiful. And she said, hey, don't you feel that, all these scars on your arms and all that? They says, no, I am not pretty. I'm ugly. And the more you tell me that I'm pretty, it makes me feel worthless and worse. and they purposely cut. I tell them, and they will cut on more open or more visible areas because they feel that they are ugly and that they are scarred, they are incomplete, and they want the external so-called to reflect their inner experiences. So that's how it works for some. Schizophrenia. This is a major mental illness that persons present with what we call positive symptoms. They could have hallucinations, they could hear voices, and they have these delusions where they are false, unshakable beliefs. Common theme is paranoia. I think that people are against me, people want to harm me, people are following me around. It also has got what we call negative symptoms. Persons with schizophrenia lack motivation, drive, ambition. They're not interested in social interaction. And it has significant occupational and functional decline. So they get worse and worse. It's chronic. It keeps getting worse or debilitating, and it's not better accounted for by other physical illnesses. So in schizophrenia, some persons may hear voices commanding them to hurt themselves, cut themselves, or they feel that they're being controlled. Alien forces are controlling my mind, compared by these external forces to hurt themselves. And if they are not, if they're too severely unwell, they're not able to resist these voices. They cannot gain control of themselves. They may do so and hurt themselves in accordance to these voices. Some of them will feel that, hey, the government has implanted a microchip in my arm, and then they will go and cut, and try and dig out the microchip. So that could be mistaken as self-harm as well. Some where the voices are so loud, so distressing, so overwhelming, they may hurt themselves in order to distract themselves from these voices or this paranoia in an attempt to regain control. So major mental illness can cause somebody to go and hurt themselves as well. And the last one is, I believe what many people will associate with self-harming, what we call personality disorder. But first, a little bit of introduction. What is personality? Personality is the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we behave. The way we think about ourselves, the way we think about other people, and the way the world works. The way we feel, the range, feel happy, feel sad, feel ecstatic, feel elated, feel grandiose, feel very sad, very restricted, very sad, how much of a range and how intensely do we feel it? Lability is how fast we change and how we behave. We behave with other people and whether we're able to control our own behavior in front of other people. And every individual has their own personality. And this personality, the way that we think and we act and we feel, influences the way we interact with other people. And this personality is typically stable over time. But most of us will have a little bit of flexibility. But most of the time, in such a situation, I would usually react in such a way. That's what our personality is. So what is a personality disorder? So it means that there's a deviation, it's different from our cultural norms and expectations, again, in the way that we think and we feel and the way we behave. Not just a deviation, because we did say in the earlier slide that there is some flexibility. Sometimes in special circumstances, I will be forced to behave in a different way. But this is an enduring pattern, or where my perceptions and my interpretations, so the way I think, is different. And the way I feel is different. And because the way I think and the way I feel is different from what everybody else usually will feel and think in such a situation, it then affects the way I behave, in the sense that my relationships gets affected and my own inner control or my self-control or impulse control becomes impaired. And this causes significant distress or impairment. So that's what a personality disorder is. It means that I have deviated from what most of the rest of the world would do, would feel, would think in a similar situation. And yes, the one that is most associated with self-harming is a person with borderline personality disorder. They have these frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. They have unstable and intense interpersonal relationships. There's this identity disturbance where they say that I don't know who I am, I don't know what am I here for, and it leads to this numbness, this distress. There's impulsivity in at least two areas that are self-damaging. They have this, and so this is where the self-harming comes in, recurrent suicidal or self-mutilating behaviors. There's a marked affective instability due to marked reactivity of mood. So they have mood swings. They can be very, very depressed, very, very angry, very, very happy, and it swings very fast. One moment they can be crying, screaming, saying, I hate you, and the next moment is, I love you. No, don't leave me. There's chronic feelings of emptiness, and this emptiness is related to their identity disturbances because they don't know who they are. They don't know what they're here for. So there's no meaning. They don't find meaning. And then there's all this numbness. Happiness is other people's happiness. Sadness is other people's sadness because nothing has meaning. It's all empty, so they feel numb. They have intense anger or difficulty controlling their anger. And for those who are very, very severe, they have transient, means it's short-lived, stress-related episodes of psychosis even. Now, this personality disorder thing cannot be diagnosed in a child. Well, a child can have this marked reactivity of their mood. Now, again, I bring up my daughter. I bring up my daughter when I carry my newborn nephew, few months old, wow, her face changed, changed suddenly, then some tears come off her eyes, and then her mouth comes down and says, why is daddy carrying someone else and not me? She didn't scream, she didn't cry, but you can tell, wow, then she keeps staring at me when I walk by carrying, and then, wow, after that, I quickly give back my newborn nephew to his mother, and then I go back and carry her. Wow, suddenly her face lights up. Oh, that is marked reactivity of mood, but that's normal for a child. A child said, oh, you don't share your sweet with me, I don't friend you anymore. But tomorrow, all of these are forgotten. So a personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, cannot be diagnosed in childhood. Can only be diagnosed after the age of 17, 18, 19 years old, depending, and it must persist because it's an enduring pattern. We must see it happen multiple different situations and so forth. So a bit difficult to diagnose in the child, but we will see signs of it already in the adolescent, meaning the teenagers and the young adults. Somebody asked a question in the chat group. What's the difference between borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder? Bipolar disorder is a major mental illness. It is not a personality disorder in the sense that I have defined personality disorder as something that is chronic, that is enduring, meaning that from young, you would have acted in a particular way because of the way you think, the way you feel, and it affects what you do. Bipolar disorder is an illness. It is like depression or schizophrenia. Before you get it, you are as well as anybody else. Once you get it, then you will have mood swings. You can swing from being depressed to what we call being manic or hypomanic. And there's no control over that because it is an illness. Again, it's like catching COVID or getting cancer. It is not something that you were born with. and it can be treated with medication. So, two different things. Yes, in the literature, people refer to both of these things as BPD. Does it stand for bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder? Two different things. So, borderline personality disorder, you need to have these 9 symptoms and various, not all at the same time, but you need at least 5. It needs to persist for a good long time since young and in different so-called situations or environments, and you still have these these 9 behaviors. For bipolar disorder, mania, intense high moods, grandiosity, a lot of thoughts and plans, but unable to see anything through. And then depression, like what I said, like what I said earlier on, low mood, loss of interests, and low mood, loss of interest, poor energy, suicidal, and so forth. So two different things. Somebody asked in the chat, how can BPD be treated? BPD, borderline personality disorder, then I assume. I will touch on that in a while. Okay. Let me continue my talk first. So moving on, where's my mouse? Okay. So because they have disordered thoughts and feelings, that reflects emotion, a person with borderline personality disorder, when they have a negative emotion like fear, if they feel fearful, then it becomes overwhelming. It becomes terror. And then when they feel this terror, there's this urge for them to flee, run away from their emotions, run away from their feelings. And what do? They avoid. They bury all of these unexpressed emotions. And the outcome is they become more fearful. Well, as mentioned, what should we be doing when we fear something? It's not run away, it's not avoid. We face the fears. Our problems, you can't go around your problems. You can only go through them. Most people don't go around or go through them, then they will just stay where they are. They don't grow, they don't develop, and then they just become even more fearful. Rejection. So when somebody says, "I'm sorry, I can't make it tonight," it could be for a valid reason that they can't make it tonight. But they will feel that, hey, you are abandoning me. You don't love me anymore. And what is that? What do they do when they feel abandoned? They will cling. I must hold on to you. And then what is the regrettable action? Then they become clingy. If you don't see me tonight, you will never see me again. Or else I call you and call 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 until you also cannot tahan. Then what happens? They become resented. Or else when they feel anger, when they get overwhelmed, it's rage. And what do they want to do when they're enraged? They will attack. And when they attack, they will say something that they regret, or they will do something that they regret, and then it damages their relationship. Or else sadness, they feel despair, they're isolated, and then they start having suicidal thoughts. So a person with borderline personality disorder, these are reflex actions that happen. They don't really have very much control over it, but at this level, the urge when they're overwhelmed and their regrettable action, there are things that they can try to do to reduce the negative outcomes. So just now somebody asked, what can we do to treat borderline personality disorder? We can target the what to do when you feel overwhelmed and what actions you can do by this thing called dialectical behavioral therapy. Or we can try and address why in the first place do they have these reflex emotions in situations where they don't have or it doesn't have these kind of reactions in other persons. As mentioned, many of these people were abused or have adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. There is what we call psychodynamic psychotherapy, things to go back into the past to address unresolved issues, to rewrite in a sense, what should have been done correctly, help them to process these emotions and these experiences in a healthier way, and hopefully try to make them feel better. Family member has BPD. How can family members help in between medical appointments, which can be very far apart? What can family do? Are there resources we can read up on and steps we can carry out? Again, I will come to that in a while. Okay. Oh, another chat. Thank you. No worries. So is self-harm that bad then? In the US, Spiritual et al. Means he and his colleagues in 1989 showed that 11% of adolescents who self-harm eventually take their own lives. Horton, that's the person who did the By Their Own Young Hands study. In 2006, identified patients aged 15 who self-harm. They had a death rate of 10.2% for all causes that are not by suicide. It means that person who self-harm has a higher rate of death, whether is it they get knocked down by a car or went on to develop a medical illness or something like that. This was an increase compared to those who did not self-harm, and so there's some thought, somebody posited that, hey, maybe a person who self-harm then becomes more prone to developing cancer, more prone to developing heart attack, or just more impulsive and get knocked down by cars and all that. But that was because the way they did the study, they just, okay, in 2006, I asked these people, and then 10 years down the road, I just did. So in between, they didn't so-called follow them up. But what they found out was there was an increase in death, 10.2% versus a whole lot less for those who did not self-harm. And for this 10.2%, 2% was suicide or probable suicide even. So we do see that self-harm can lead to suicide. All right, so we're coming down to the last part of my talk. Management of self-harm. Safety first. So, just now one of the questions was, persons who self-harm are dangerous. If you want to help somebody, please ensure the safety of yourself and the person who is self-harming. If you catch a person self-harming, he could be cutting himself or cutting herself, and then you want to be hero or try and grab the knife away and all that, or you could get hurt. Be very, very cautious. Especially if the person who is self-harming is still distressed and is actively self-harming if they're cutting, because they may not be able to control themselves. They are trying very hard to control themselves by cutting, because they are having a lot of intense, distressing emotions. And cutting helps them. And if you try and pull them away, pull the knife away and all that, they may hurt you, and it is not their intention to hurt you. Yes, you're trying to help them, but be very, very careful. Or they may hurt you unintentionally when you try and stop them. First aid. Assess the severity of the self-harm or determine whether further medical management is required. The wound is very big. It's not one of those thin lines. If there's active bleeding that will not stop, or you come out, oh shit, there's a whole pool of blood. A lot of blood has already been lost. Or if there's a loss of function, if the cut is so deep, there's weakness, there's numbness, they can't move the fingers. If, for example, there's a cut at the wrist. These show that the cut is very deep, it's very serious. You need to send them to the hospital immediately. For persons who bang their head, if they bang their head hard enough that they lose consciousness, even if it's for a brief 2-3 seconds, it is serious. If it is a drug overdose, especially if you're unsure of what drugs will consume. That is serious. It may be 2 tablets, could be 20 tablets, could be 200 tablets. If you don't know what the medicine is, you don't know whether 2 tablets is enough to kill, please send them to a hospital so that they can receive further assessment and management as required. Ascertain the objective of their self-harm. Talk to the person. Was it a self-harm attempt to feel better? To cope with my emotional pain. I label this as because I'm cutting to relieve pain. I'm cutting to feel better. In a sense that I'm cut so that I can continue to live. If this is a cut to live versus was it I can't take it anymore. I'm cutting not to help with the pain, but I'm cutting to end the pain once and for all. This I label as cut to die, or meaning they were suicidal, because we have seen 30% 30% were suicidal when they presented with a self-harm. 40% of those with self-harm were suicidal previously. 50% of them had suicide attempts previously. So it's important when you see a person with self-harm, why are they self-harming? Are they cutting to live? Or are they cutting to die? Now, regardless of the severity of the method, it could be the exact same cut, thin line, no blood. But if the thought behind that cut is, I want to die, they need to be referred for further assessment of this suicidal risk. Now, that is important. Okay. If the thinking or so-called the motivation or behind that self-harm was suicide, they need to be referred for further assessment. So apart from that, when else do you refer to the mental health professional? Number one, as I mentioned, ascertain the suicidal risk and further management as necessary. I spoke to you about depression and schizophrenia, but there are many other mental illnesses that can increase the risk of self-harming behavior. So assess for underlying major mental health illnesses that contribute to these self-harming behavior. Sometimes treatment of these mental illnesses can improve their self-harm behavior. That's when you need to think about referring onwards to a mental health professional. So to answer the question of what can we do? Now, what can we do? Well, if you're not a mental health professional, if you're not a caring professional, end of the day, as mentioned, person who self-harms is not trying to detach from their attachments. They are still trying to maintain relationships. So as family members, as friends, or as professionals, what can we do for a person who self-harms? Person self-harms because he may feel depressed, he may feel guilty, he may feel ugly, may feel abandoned, may feel rejected. But suffice to say, they must have some negative emotional pain. And when we are in pain, we seek to be comforted. And we will go to mommy or go to daddy when we are in pain. So there is a relationship that needs to be built. And so you need to build this relationship. And it is not say, okay, earlier on someone said that friend, someone said their family, someone said it's my niece, someone said it's my daughter, someone said that it's a professional relationship. You may have a pre-existing relationship, could be your niece, could be your daughter, could be your family member. You may have a pre-existing relationship, but you need to build a new relationship, one of trust, one of hope, Well, how you do it is more important than what you do. Now, some people say, come, let's sit down and talk lah. Youngsters may not want to do that. Youngsters may want to be left alone. But they need to know that you are there. There's this thing about just sitting down with a person, letting them know that you are available and you are not going to reject them. You are the non-rejecting caregiver in the sense that they may have felt abandoned by the caregiver, as mentioned, for example, a person with borderline personality disorder. Their first relationship, not to say that they had bad parents. I'm not saying that all bad parents, their children will develop borderline personality disorder. In fact, we do see many persons with borderline personality disorder with very, 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 very supportive parents who were present when they were young and all that, and they cannot understand. That is not it is not a blanket statement, but we do see persons with adverse childhood experiences do tend to develop borderline personality disorder or other personality disorders. For whatever reason, they felt that they were abandoned or they were rejected. We, whether it's a friend, a family, a professional, or whoever else it is, must be the non-rejecting caregiver, the non-abandoning one. Trust, hope, but you must maintain your boundaries, especially if you're a professional. You're not the father, you're not the mother. But they may cling to you. And that's where there's this whole problem of there's this thought or problem of psychiatrists or therapists ending up sleeping with their patients. Why? Because they develop a very, very close and a very, very intimate relationship. And sometimes we lose control. That's why it's important to maintain boundaries. You must always, always, always remember what is your role. And the caregiver is there to protect, not to take advantage, not to use your power difference to further abuse this person who has been abused. You need to maintain boundaries. The person may say, I love you, I need you, I want to have sex with you, whatever, whatever. You must always say no. And you must support transitions. If you are professional, you must transition to the family. If you are a friend, you must transition to the family. If you're a family, you must transition to a closer family, someone else. Always talk, always communicate. Someone asked, is there anything someone asked in the chat early on? Is there anything we can read up on, steps we can carry out? Google this, Project AIR. Oops, sorry. Key principles from Project AIR. Be compassionate. Listen and validate. Take the person's experience seriously. Non-judgmental. You have to stay calm. They are experts at pressing the wrong buttons. They'll say, you don't care about me, you bitch, you this, you caused me to be like this, or whatever, whatever, whatever. Stay calm. They're experts at pressing buttons. Remain respectful and caring. Be human. Acknowledge that life can be serious and can be funny. You need to have trust. We have to be consistent and reliable. Again, hope. We all have to understand that challenging behaviors have what we call survival value. It helps them cope. So Project AIR is I think Australian, if I'm not wrong. They came up with a whole series of resources to help lay persons understand borderline personality disorder plus other personality disorders, but mainly borderline personality disorders, and it gives them in layman terms an understanding of why persons were like that and what can you so-called do to try and help. So yeah, this is one resource that you can go and look at. So a recommended approach: empathy, open questioning, validating statements. Seek to stimulate reflection about solutions. Or what can you do other than cutting yourself, banging your head? What else can you do? Don't refrain from offering solutions prematurely. Say, you've tried this. Was it helpful? You've tried this in the past, and what did it lead to? Resist the urge of how about doing this instead? Let them come up with a solution and then go through the pros and cons of that solution. Let them try it out and see how successful they are. Avoid minimizing the patient's stated reason for the crisis. They will tell you in your mind it's so small. I just didn't pick up my phone one time and then wow, you want to break up with me. No, that's because daddy abandoned her, and then daddy is supposed to love you unconditionally. Your one missing of the phone call is equivalent to leaving me like daddy did. But she's not going to tell you that. No, don't minimize. Listen. People say, is there any medicine that we can give? No, sorry. It's limited evidence. What medicine can do is useful for treating the depression or the schizophrenia or the panic disorder, or the bipolar disorder. It's not very much used for in the absence of a major mental illness. Therapy has been shown to be of more use if you have borderline personality disorder. So this is a little bit beyond, because I'm supposed to talk about child and adolescent self-harm. There have been therapists who have adapted treatments for borderline personality disorder, the so-called DBT that I spoke earlier on, dialectical behavior therapy, and used it for these adolescents who have what we call emerging borderline personality traits. Some have been useful, some have not been all that useful. So take it with a pinch of salt. Someone asks, addictive behavior. Alcoholism, drinking to the point of passing out, self-harm, suicide behavior. Is this a mental health issue? What kind of treatment is suggested, names, etc.? Addictions is a different talk. I could give you another hour on addictions. But addictions can occur singly on its own, but it is usually seen together with other mental health issues like depression or anxiety, because we do know that in distress or in stress, people turn to substances like alcohol and drugs to make themselves feel better. So they self-treat. So it could be a coping mechanism. It could be a cry for help. It could be a suicide attempt. So you need to speak to the individual and try and see what is the motivation behind it. Very similar to person who self-harm. So this is like an approach to a person's mental health issue, whether is it self-harming, whether is it addictions. Or this is what we call behavioral issues. Alcoholism can be considered behavioral. Find out what are the motivations or the thoughts behind it. And if there are underlying mental illnesses, we can treat it. But addictions has been recognized as a major mental illness because there are what we call biological or bodily changes in addictions as well. The brain structure changes. And yes, there are treatments for it as well, what we call NAMS, or your National Addictions Management Services at IMH. Again, that is another 1 to 2 hours talk. Someone asked, where can one go to get diagnosed if it's bipolar BPD? Look for a psychiatrist, because the psychiatrist is the one who makes the diagnosis. Psychiatrist doesn't just exist in IMH. There are psychiatric services in all of your restructured hospitals. SGH, NUH, Ng Teng Fong, even the New Woodlands Health, they have and they can provide exceptional psychiatric services as well. Someone asked, I think disorders such as binge eating disorder, bulimia, anorexia are considered self-harm. Again, we do see that they co-occur. We do see eating disorders, as mentioned, persons with disordered body image, right? 2 times 1.969, 2 times more likely to engage in self-harm. Also, are they considered self-harm? They can, but they are classified as a major mental illness and not just self-harm. Self-harm is a behavior or a symptom. We see it in, like I've mentioned before, depression, in schizophrenia. We see it in borderline personality disorder. We see it in anorexia and eating disorders. We see it in many mental health issues. What have I been talking about? I've been talking about persons with no mental health issues, and they also self-harm. These are the 70, 80, 90% who don't present to mental health services. So one of the statements earlier on or questions earlier on is, person who self-harms or is must be having a mental illness. No, it's not. Many persons without a major mental illness will self-harm as well. Okay. All right. So DBT, this is a very, very short introduction to DBT, okay? The basis behind DBT is the persons who you are dealing with are more vulnerable. There's this what we call biological vulnerability, or they were so-called born this way. They're more sensitive than other people, high sensitivity. They pick up more emotions in themselves and in other people. And you will find that, hey, these borderlines are, when you get to know them when they're not in crisis, they're actually very, very good friends. They're very, very caring. They will be the first one to come and help you and all. Because why? They pick up emotions in themselves. They're acutely aware of their own emotions. Then they become acutely aware of other people's emotions as well. When they're well and functional and all that, and they often are, they're actually very good friends. So apart from being more sensitive, they have high reactivity. They react more strongly to emotions, and it takes them a longer time, slow return to baseline. So they get triggered fast, and it takes a very long time for them to cool down. And you have one where they're easily triggered because they're more sensitive, and then they react more strongly, and then they take a longer time to cool off. Wow. What this then leads to is somebody who's angry all the time. That's what you get this. You'll get this feeling that, they say, walking on eggshells around these people, because the smallest thing will trigger them off, and then for the next 2 weeks, it's hell on earth, and then, all this kind of stuff. Social vulnerability, an invalidating social environment that teaches them that what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're doing is wrong. We often say, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. This is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. In our Asian family cultures, is that don't talk about your feelings. I've heard so many people who say that my parents don't understand about mental health, or my grandparents don't understand mental health. They're not supportive. They don't believe in mental health. You just need to suck it up. Just go into one corner, suck thumb and cry, right? The social environment teaches us that what you're doing, what you're feeling is wrong. And then they take all this, you are wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, and then internalizes, and then they say, I am bad, I am bad, I am bad. And then this leads to multiple behavioral problems. When we approach them in DBT, we have to emphasize it's not their fault that they have this difficulty managing their emotions and their behaviors. Need to acknowledge that their emotional needs were not met when they were growing up, or their conditions were not ideal for them to learn how to manage their behaviors. Empathize. Yes, I understand that it is a difficult situation. If there were other things that could help, I'm sure you wouldn't commit suicide. I'm sure you wouldn't go and harm yourself, right? So what DBT then tries or hopes to do is helps them to increase their distress tolerance. So as what Mr. Melvin was alluding to earlier on, early detection, early detection and early intervention. We can find them out, we can give them the training to be more resilient, how to cope with distress, ability to cope during a crisis, or accept the situation as it is rather than how it should be. There's a lot of should statements. I should be better. I should be more pretty. I should be skinnier. I should be whatever. A lot of people have this I should when they meet a problem. Change that should, that word, that should statement or that should thought into would. I would like to be better. I would like to be prettier. I would like to be more caring. I would like to be, When you say I should, it means that I have failed. There's this expectation that I should, means that I have failed. But when I say I would like to be, then that becomes a goal, a target for me to improve. I stop with the self-blame, the self-criticism, and I turn all this negative energy into I would like to be this. Change that thought, cope with the distress. Interpersonal effectiveness, the ability to ask another person for what they need to say no to them when necessary. Some of us are okay lah, already very busy, but if they ask me to for help, okay lah, never mind lah. There's this okay lah, okay lah. And then I feel very bad to say no lah. How many of us have that? No, you need to be able to say no when you cannot take it anymore, and still maintain that self-respect. Said you must be more assertive, you must take charge, you cannot keep being bullied. You must set your boundaries. Mindfulness, live in the moment, accept that what is happening in the here and now. Regulate the emotions, understand the emotion. That's why they self-harm, right? One of the reasons why they self-harm, because they can't name it, they can't understand it. But DBT helps you to understand it, helps you to name it, reduces your vulnerability and decreases your emotional suffering because you are able to understand it. All right, so I have come to the end of my talk. 4 o'clock, or 4:07, overran by a few minutes. So I'm just looking at some questions that have come up. Are there support groups in Singapore specifically for caregivers of youths with BPD? Where can we get DBT in Singapore? I'm not familiar with support groups for youths with BPD. I don't really think that there are, as far as I know. Where can we get DBT? Many psychologists can provide DBT. Again, yes, IMH provides it. Many of the RH psychiatric departments will have psychologists who provide it. There are tons of psychologists in private practice who do DBT as well. So yeah, I'd like to hand over the time back to either Dion or Alex to moderate the questions.
Okay, hi, good. Okay, I think Dr. Kelvin, I think you can unshare the screen. Okay, I would like to ask, for those who have questions, how can they reach out to you?
Sorry, have I stopped sharing already?
Yes, yes, stop sharing.
Okay.
How would they reach out to you if our audience have any questions to you? Questions for you in regarding to self-harm or so?
Um, do you all have an email that they can email to? Then you can forward it to me.
Mm,
Yes. Maybe they can email to our Caring for Life general email, general@caringforlifesg.org. We will be able to compile and send to you.
Sure. Any other questions?
mm. Okay, if there's no questions, I would like to thank everyone for your time. I hope that everyone has gained some invaluable insights and from these talks. Do know that for 2 weeks later we'll have our second talk by Miss Lyon Ko, head of CREST Youth Shine, to speak about emotional and physical first aid for self-harm. Registrations are still open for that talk, and we hope you would spread the word, and we hope to see you at CFL's events. With that, we have come to the end of day one of our self-harm prevention month. Thank you, and everyone have a great weekend ahead.